Hi, I'm Kathleen Gros, and you're listening to the True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book creators and supporters. It's September 21st, 2020. I'm John Swinimer. If you have a comment, criticism, or question, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with Kathleen Gros. The podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. Kathleen is a cartoonist living in Vancouver, British Columbia. She's the creator behind the graphic novel Joe, an adaptation of Little Women, sort of, from HarperCollins that's out right now. 2 more graphic novels from HarperCollins have been announced with releases slated for 2022 and 2024. Her other works include Last Night at Wormwood High for Cloudscape Comics 2015 and Lunar, an ongoing webcomic. Kathleen is also the current secretary of the Vancouver-based charitable organization Cloudscape Comics. She graduated with a BFA in illustration from Emily Carr University of Art and Design in 2015 and teaches comics in the Continuing Studies program at Langara. So without further ado, here's my chat with Kathleen Gros. So Kathleen Gros, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Wonderful to talk to you today, John.
Well, I appreciate your time. What I usually do to start off the interview is ask the creator about their first comic book. So I'm wondering if you remember, what was the first comic book that you read?
Oh, boy. Yeah, it's a little hard to think back that far. I want to say probably Garfield, maybe, or Archie. I remember, probably a weird one is, I remember my dad had this sort of like satirical cycling book that was all comics all the way through, and I remember being like obsessed with that because immediately I was just like drawn to comics as a form of storytelling. But I think the first comic that like really stuck with me and made me want to make comics was Thieves and Kings by Mark Oakley. I don't know if you're familiar with that series.
I've heard of that one. Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of an obscure Canadian deep dive. I don't know. I feel like I know so many Canadian cartoonists and so many of them haven't read the series, but it was so influential for me. It's this like very high fantasy series about a sort of magical city on the edge of an ocean and the various inhabitants. And I think it was like self-published starting in the 90s. I think Oakley lives in the Maritimes somewhere. But yeah, it's a really interesting book series. I think there's about 6 books right now because it's half comics, half illustrated manuscript style prose. And the first time I'd ever heard the term graphic novel was somebody used it in reference to Thieves and Kings in this very unique format. So for a really long time, that's what I thought a graphic novel was that graphic novels were half illustrated manuscript, half comics.
Very good. So I'm wondering, who or what inspires you to create today?
Yeah, I mean, I think I create comics. It's sort of like more of a calling than anything. Like I feel compelled to do it in some ways. It just feels like the like truest way I can express myself is through both writing and drawing. But I'm so inspired by basically everything that's coming out right now. Like we are in such a wealth of comics, such a rich time to be reading comics because there's really something for everybody out there. Yeah, I'm trying to think what I've read recently that really stuck with me. I mean, I'm always a fan of the Tamakis, like Mariko Tamaki and Gillian Tamaki, of course, both separately, together, phenomenal. And I'm so inspired by my peers too, just like so many people in the Vancouver comics scene. Just, I see their work and I'm like, dang, that's amazing. You make me want to work harder. One of the local folks who is like really inspiring me lately is Jazz Grodin Gilchrist. Like his work is just phenomenal. Like whenever I see him do a layout, I'm like, this is the coolest thing ever. I need to work harder. Like this guy knows what's going on. And I love Cole Paul's work as well.
Right. Yeah. Lots of talent out there for sure, and certainly across Canada. So absolutely. I wanted to talk with you a bit about a follow-up to our last conversation we had at TCAF in 2019. You mentioned back then you were working on a major project for HarperCollins. I understand that's finally coming out, and I wonder if you could talk a bit about it.
Yeah. I don't know when this interview's gonna come out, but when we're recording it, it's just like less than a week till it comes out. It comes out on the 22nd of September. Really excited about that. It's a middle grade graphic novel, this modern day adaptation of Little Women that reimagines the March sisters as girls sort of spanning grade 5 through 9 and sort of follows them through a year in their life. Yeah, I'm so excited for it to come out. It's been such a long journey, but finally people are going to get to read it, and I think that's really cool. Yeah.
That is pretty cool. I remember that you chatted about it and you were just about to begin it, and having to come to fruition, that must be a big relief.
Yeah, it's funny. Comics take a really long time to make. I was thinking about this recently because I think it was like 3 years ago. I was like sitting down to draw sample pages to pitch this project, and then I started drawing it. I think 2018, or started writing it in 2018, and then spent most of 2019 drawing it. And now we're nearing the end of 2020, and people actually get to read it.
That's great. I was reading on one of the HarperCollins websites that it said that the book has been called a must-read for fans of Raina Telgemeier. I'm wondering, is that a fair assessment?
I mean, I think that's incredibly flattering. Oh my gosh, Raina Telgemeier is just amazing. I adore her work. So I hope people would think that of me.
Okay, that's good. Good company to be in, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, cool. So I want to maybe take a step back, and maybe if you want to use Joe as a reference, but certainly want to talk about your creative process. How do you go from the initial concept to the finished page?
Maybe Joe is the most cohesive of all the comics I've made as far as process goes, just because so many people had to be looking at what I was doing. I was working with my editors, started off with one editor and then switched over to a different editor during the process, and then also some art directors as well who were looking in at the work, and then also it would get passed to different departments. So many people had to see the work. I really had to be very focused and streamlined in the way that I was making it. So we started off with sort of a general outline of the work, just breaking down sort of this is what's going to happen and when, and these are the themes we're going to push as I work on this. And then I wrote a script, which I just type on the computer. It usually takes me a couple of passes to get basically the first draft of a script. I just kind of write out the flow of what I want to happen without thinking about page or panel breakdown. So it'll be this character does this and says this. And then I do a second pass where I'm actually sketching thumbnails as I go through the first sort of word vomit that I've written, and tidy things up and think, okay, where do I want the page breaks? How do I want these panels to be arranged? And I have a physical notebook that I'm doing that in, because I find that's one of the best ways to sort of gauge whether I've put too much text in a panel, because it's very easy to type a line on the computer, and then you have to get to the page, and that takes up a certain amount of real estate on the page. So you have to think, okay, have I arranged this text in a way that is going to flow well and stuff? And then once that goes through sort of an editing process, go back and forth, do a bunch of revisions. And then from there, got to start in on the pencils. And I pencil traditionally. I don't like drawing on the computer very much.
Okay.
I mean, the rest of my process is digital, but I like drawing pencil, with my pencil on the paper. So yeah, I drew Joe on Bristol with the pencil and then scanned that in and then inked it digitally. It was actually the first big project that I inked digitally, because I used to always do traditional inking. My previous graphic novel, Last Night at Wormwood High, is inked all traditionally with a brush, and then my webcomic Lunar Maladies is also inked traditionally with a brush. Right. But I'd been sort of experimenting with inking digitally, and had done a couple sort of style passes on the characters, and the style that was inked digitally was the one that resonated the most with the art directors, so that's the direction I took the art in. And then I color it digitally. I don't want to say basic colorist. I think I'm a good colorist. I flat the pages with the colors I want everything to be, and then I add a bit of shading and highlights. Nothing too fancy, straightforward. Yeah. And I letter on the computer too.
you're starting off traditionally and then it gets to the digital process. Do you think you
Yeah.
ever might try digital all the way through, or is that just going too far?
I mean, maybe. I'm not opposed to it. I think for me, there's something about like being able to gauge the spatial relationship on the page, like looking at it physically in front of me, as opposed to on the computer, because on the computer I can like zoom in and zoom out a lot, which for me is really great at like the coloring stage and the inking stage to make sure like, different values are balanced and stuff. But when I'm trying to like draw a person or draw something in perspective or whatever, I just need it in front of me on the page. I don't know. It feels
Sure.
like gauging the space of the drawing feels very different on the screen to me.
Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely. So you've got Joe ready to come out any second. I'm wondering if you have any other projects in the works that you can talk about.
Yeah, I think this announcement time has no meaning anymore. So I'm like, I feel like this announcement came out recently, but I don't know when it came out. But I am signed on to do 2 more books with HarperCollins. So
Wow, that's great.
yeah, I'm so excited about that. I really love the team that I've gotten to work with. My editor's fantastic. I love my agent. Just everyone's been so great. So I'm currently working on the script for another modern day adaptation, tackling Anne of Green Gables this time.
Wow.
And then so that's coming out in 2022 sometime. And then I've got another book slated for 2024, which is an original story, not an adaptation, sort of about this girl and her family in a small town in Ontario, and sort of a bunch of stuff that happens to her one summer, basically.
My goodness, sounds like you're going to be busy.
Yeah, that's the way I like it. Keeps me out of trouble.
Well, that's good. That's good that you're busy. Do you ever have time? Like, these are major projects when you're working with HarperCollins. Do you ever have a chance just to do, like, I know you've got, is Lunar Malady still going on? Is that still something that you're working on? Okay.
Yeah, Lunar Maladies is funny. I finished drawing it over a year ago, I think, or maybe about a year ago. When I got into doing webcomics, I always wanted to have a buffer, and it was very strategic because one of the reasons that I do and have done webcomics and like put my work online is just to make sure that I'm, staying sort of present and current in people's minds, as well as like their stories I really want to work on and put out there. But I knew that I could draw a certain number of pages a week, so I released fewer pages than that a week. So then, if I'm drawing 3 pages a week and only releasing 1, then that means that I always have a bit of a buffer built in there. So because Lunar Melodies is quite long, I wound up having a gigantic buffer. And once I finished drawing it, I was like, I'm going to speed up how fast I'm releasing this, because otherwise it's going to be like another 5 years before it's done. So I think it's going to wrap up in a couple months.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Wrap up posting. Yeah,
because I know sometimes when you're working on a major project, it's nice to have a little bit of as you said, a buffer to sort of step back and look at something else in between. But sounds like you're going to have your head down focused on this for some time.
Yeah, I mean, I always try to find time to work on personal projects and other things, even when I'm working on a big graphic novel. I like to have a couple things going on. So it keeps things interesting for me. Like if I'm drawing a graphic novel, I like to have like a little writing project on the side so that if I get stuck on one thing, I can switch gears and focus on something else. But mostly just personal projects other than the graphic novel.
Cool. So for people to find out more about what you're up to and certainly your future projects, where do you recommend they go online to find you?
Yeah, I'm very Googleable. There's not like a ton of other Kathleen Grosses out there. If there are, I'm the one that comes up first. I mean, just follow me on social media. I'm mostly on Twitter and Instagram. I use the same username everywhere. It's CAG Comics, which is KAGCOMIX. And then my website is usually that's sort of where I curate my portfolio stuff and will post announcements. And that's just, again, cagcomics.com. Yeah.
Thanks to Kathleen for the chat. You can discover more about Kathleen on Twitter at KAGCOMIX and online at cagcomics.com. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts, and please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at TrueNorthComics. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. Truth Country Comics Podcast is copyright Truth Country Comics, copyright 2020.